Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning whenever you hear or see this broadcast. It's a pre-recorded show, and I'll have it released in probably a couple of days or so. But I want to get down to brass tacks here on the strange reality. This is Dave Emmons, of course, and I come to you about twice a week, and I get a lot of support from my Facebook viewers. I appreciate that quite a bit. I'm trying to get around into I have admin teams now working on getting me off on YouTube and Spotify and also Rumble. So I'm doing that also. Uh, I just want to get down, like I said, the groundwork about believing in things. And a lot of people don't believe in different things, paranormal, ghost, uh, cryptids, Bigfoot, or even ETs, uh, and UFOs or UAPs. I know a lot of people, this about 50%. I was just talking to my guest here a while ago, and you remember the guy that I had here about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I got him back with his wife tonight, and she's
Mhm.
going to set him straight. I know that's what the wives are for. They set you straight, right? But
That is very true.
yes, but everything that we talk about, and everything that I've ever talked about, is that we're personally disclosing what we know. And I think if more people do that, we'll get down to the groundwork of getting disclosure ourselves and listening to one another what's going on. I want to introduce my guest tonight, Artemaeus and Tillie Treadwell. Of course, Tillie, that's my mom's nickname, and she's 97 years old. So
Aw.
you'll probably live a long time with that name, Tillie. Yeah. I think my aunts and uncles gave her that name years ago, and I think she spells about the same way. I think it's Tillie. We've never officially, wrote it out, but that's what they called her, the nickname. My brothers called me other things, but I can't say it on the air. I,
Right.
I had eight brothers. They had different names for me, nicknames, but I won't say that on the air. Artemaeus and Tillie Treadwell. They're American experiencers. After meeting paranormal intermediary Tillie, his life took, this is Artemaeus, took thousands of unforeseen, unforgettable turns, from witnessing Tillie's psychic abilities to bumping into a fairy. More, I guess he bumped into a fairy, and meeting mimics. We'll have him explain that. He talked about that on the last show. And dark entities, maybe an Egyptian god or two, seeing UFOs and strange planetary behavior, and more at home. Extreme electrical events, I know what those are, strange scientific anomalies, apports and disappearing objects, time glitches, and Mandela effect are positively common events. Bizarrely, his foray into the deep paranormal has transformed his personality, beliefs, and understanding of psychology, reality, and life in measures and ways no short of miraculous. He believes that the unknown holds many gifts, if only we can learn to embrace them, and unique messengers who carry them. And this is Tillie here. I know we read this a little bit off last year, about 2 3 weeks ago, but I was anticipating meeting her. She's the powerhouse of the two, and she's the catalyst that we're Artemis caught on to. He latched onto her coattails, I guess, and went into
Mhm.
went into this paranormal world. Tillie Treadwell is an American author and experiencer. She's a writer, and she's also got a podcast. And they're into another project, to a TV project before long. Her very earliest memories include what seemed to be paranormal encounters, and the other side has always played central role in her life. She was co-lead of an exorcist and an investigative team with the Catholic Church. Has worked as an independent tarot interpreter, healer, medium, and advisor, and today is an author for Zontar Press. And I guess you're still an author for that press, okay?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a publishing house run by the Tim Swartz and Ancient Aliens. She also writes for Outer Limits magazine and the Quad Coalition of Sciences. Notably, later this year, a piece of hers will appear in a new book by Malcolm Robinson of SPI in the UK, and she is currently hard at work on several other book inclusions and some standalone volumes with Zonter Press. At this time, she is taking a break from the spotlight to focus on writing in her new role in a discovery of an unexpected novel treatment option for porphyria, porphyria,
Porphyria.
porphyria,
Porphyria.
Yeah, that's one of those $5 words I have to break it down and change, you know. But uh, uh, a rare genetic condition that causes the inability to bear exposure to sunlight, which she was born with. And Artemaeus and Tillie Treadwell, welcome to the show. And
Thank you for
Tillie,
having us.
yeah, and Tillie, that not being able to be in the sunlight is kind of like a vampire, isn't it? Let me see your neck there, Artemis.
Right. Yeah. Maybe that's that long hair
Yeah.
helps to hide some of that.
Okay.
But
Uh,
yeah, that's actually porphyria is the disease that some vampirism, the legends and some of the myths actually derive from. A
Right.
lot of the
Mhm.
symptoms of porphyria uh, produce what some people would seem as vampire-like. So,
Yeah, I like the way you say it. You say it better than I do. I just stumbled on it there for failure. Okay. All right.
that's it.
I'll just think of just but how are you two doing? And I know it's been about 2, 3 weeks since I saw you last, Artemis. And has there been anything happen lately? And what's going on with the two of you today? Each one of you take turns, whatever, which one takes for a turn.
Me, I'm just continuing on the research and hopefully the funding of porphyria research. Um, I mean cures, I'm sorry. Now you've got me all tongue-tied, Dave.
Okay.
I'm working with specialists to find um, more ways to publicly implement what I have discovered in my own personal research. So I was born with three unique genetic differences, and it's extremely rare, almost unheard of, really, to have someone born with all three at the same time. So while I was looking last year at a novel treatment for another genetic quirk that I have, I realized that there was crossover for the treatment between one genetic difference and another. And I developed a theory that this treatment, which would be used to help people with certain types of diabetes, could also be used to possibly treat porphyria. And I was right. So after about 2.5 months of being on this treatment, getting acclimated, I started to inch my hand out into the sunlight, and sure enough, I wasn't having the reactions, and now I can go out into the sunlight. I mean, of course, I've still got to be careful. I'm still being monitored by genetic specialists and whatnot, but now I can walk amongst you mortals without fear for my life.
Day walkers, they call them.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, I got to be careful though, Tilly, because if I get out in the
Oh,
sun
yeah.
with this bald head, it's going to hurt. Yeah, so I got to be
yeah.
careful too. So that's that's a form of sunburn, and I get those easy. Artemis,
Oh,
you were talking last week that Tilly, she kind of started you off in this paranormal area, and could you, I guess, in join her in conversation about what she started you with paranormal and taught you what's going on. And I wanted to ask this porphyria that does it does it give you extra paranormal abilities or psychic abilities, you think, from the DNA?
No comment.
It's hard to say, really, what's related to what, because there are so many factors going on at the same time that, to isolate causal effect from, one single factor is pretty difficult, even in, controlled laboratory settings. So I mean, I think it's interesting that her aversion to sunlight seems to be typical of, other types of different peoples.
Mm,
But she already also has the neurodivergence about her to begin with. So, like other people on the autism spectrum, for example, not that I would call any of them non-human or aliens or anything like that. They are, though, noticeably different in some ways from the average person. So, for whatever that's worth, I mean, maybe the porphyria is linked in some way. Maybe it's not. It's hard to say.
okay.
What he said.
Yeah. Tilly, now before you met Artemis, I know that you led him down the road of paranormal and he caught on to a lot of different things. You were experienced in, I guess, early on in your life with the paranormal.
Yeah.
Could
Yes.
you Could you take us there, Tillie, about how this all happened?
Sure. I'm not sure if you'd want me to begin with some memories that I seem to have pre-birth, or if you want me to start post-birth, but I seem to have some memories either way. I guess to start
Yeah,
from
both.
the very
Yeah, start from the very beginning when you're a child, small child,
okay.
and what a lot of people get their start in paranormal and ET abductions when they're young kids.
Mhm.
So go ahead, Tillie, and explain that.
That's true. That's true. Well, my very first paranormal memory, I was in a baby carrier and I was wrapped in a nice little fluffy blue blanket. I couldn't have been more than 6 months old, maybe. And I remember being taken up out of my little body, and there was a being who presented herself as like the full moon, essentially. She was massive compared to me. So I was holding what I would say is the astral form of my little baby self.
Mhm.
And she took me up and she was holding me even though she had no arms. It was, I still don't understand how that was quite possible, to be honest.
Right.
But she said, "Thank you for coming to Earth." And she was asking what she could do to um, encourage me and reward me. And it was all telepathic, you could say. And I didn't understand. So I was afraid and I just started to cry.
Yeah.
She put me back into my body in the baby carrier, and I just remember crying and crying and crying until I cried myself to sleep. That was my very first experience. And then um, later on, I want to say I was about 3 or 4 years old, I started having memories, or to me, what seemed to be memories of being existing before I came here in this body. So I was inhabiting objects around my grandma's house before I came here. She loved cuckoo clocks, and I would hide in the cuckoo clock. And then when I was 3 and 4 years old, I couldn't understand why I couldn't do that anymore, why I couldn't go hide on the mantle, hide in the little decorations on the mantle, or be up in the cuckoo clock anymore, or be looking out of a doll's eyes or a teddy bear's eyes, because I used to do that, is
Mhm.
what I remembered. And I couldn't understand that now I was physically here and I have this meat suit. So for me, it was interesting to have what seemed to be those pre-birth memories, but then also to have the physical confusion about why I couldn't do things like fly anymore or inhabit objects. And that was really my start
Yeah.
in the
So
paranormal. And
yeah.
then the
So
next big thing was that I made friends with, you could say, a little fairy critter who became my best friend for many years, and sometimes I still seem to get visits from him.
now I want to take you back to what you said. This lady's arms, yeah, I guess it didn't have arms or something. And then what
Yeah.
what did she look like that was talking to you when you were a baby? Did she look like an
So
angel or?
she was the full moon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. She was the full moon. She had, okay, do you know those old-fashioned illustrations where the moon has a face in the
Yes.
nursery rhymes?
Right.
It was just like that. She was just like that, except 5D. That's the only thing I can think of to explain it. It was, she was more real than real, if that makes any kind of
Mm.
sense.
And so you remember a lot of your past lives. That's what you're also saying, right, Tilly?
Um, Not really. I think I have a few flash memories, but I seem to retain more memories of time between lives, incarnations. So the
Mhm.
times between.
Okay, let's move on from
Yeah,
a small child, and as you grow up, could you tell us some of the stories, some of the things that happened to you, your experiences after being a baby and getting out and being a little older and being able to observe things, and then try to build it up to the point to where you met Artemis. But tell us about your childhood and then before you were married to Artemis, because Artemis told us a lot about stuff here about 3 weeks ago, about a month ago, but I want to hear more from you now. And until it
sure.
break off from there and carry on through the rest of your life, your childhood, and your experiences. And
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. That was my early childhood, but I was around the age of 5. And um, so I was originally born here in Lake Mary, Florida, and then I spent lots of time up north by where Artemaeus is originally from. We had lots and lots of wildflowers and tall grasses and blooming bushes in the state where I lived. And I spent a lot of time as a 5 and a 6 and a 7-year-old outside by myself in the backyard, um, talking to flowers, essentially, just chatting with the flowers, or trying to anyway, and lounging in the grass, playing in the grass. And one day, this was during the late spring, I was outside and I was enjoying the time out, and there was a little critter in the grass with me. And I didn't see him at first, but then he asked me essentially, "What are you doing?" And it was again telepathic,
Mhm.
but he was chirping at the same time. It was very interesting. And I answered him, "Well, I'm talking to the flowers, of course. They're my friends." And um, again, I was very young, so I didn't understand that things don't work the same here. And he was asking me essentially, "Why are you talking to the flowers when they can't talk back?" And I said, "I don't know, habit." But of course, I didn't say it like that. I just said, "It's what I do." I don't know. But we were talking and communicating. He was a little about this big. He was what looked like a little wolf, but he had a few different appearances. When I originally remember meeting him, he had what looked like bat wings. He was a little gray wolf type creature with um, black bat wings, and he had really long pointed ears that went backwards, and then he had a butterfly tongue that he would flip out sometimes, and he chirped like a bird, but then he had eyes like a goat.
Oh.
And that was one of his presentations. In some of the other presentations, his front legs went out the other way, and he had what looked like really exotic butterfly wings. And he had small horns that came out of his forehead, and he had more of like cat's eyes. But either way, he was the same critter. I don't think that he had a stable physical form, though, to be honest. I think when he was coming into this world, he would change it up sometimes for whatever reason. But to me at the time, it wasn't weird, so I didn't say anything about it. I was just so used to seeing things change.
Hmm.
Um, but we became really good friends, and he asked if he could come inside with me one day when we were playing. And I said, "Yeah, of course. Just, be quiet, and I think it'll be okay." So, being a little girl, I didn't know any better. He came in and he hid in my closet, and that's usually where he would be. He would be in my closet, or he would be under the bed, or sometimes he'd follow me throughout the house and he would hide in the other closets too. And you know how kids often have the imaginary friends.
Yes.
I would try to tell my mom and my dad um, to please not disturb the closets too much because my friend Bo lives there now. And of course they didn't believe me. They just said, no, that's not true. Your imagination is run wild. But then a big turning point in my life, even at that young age, happened when um, I started asking Bo to just make himself known, and he would start to chirp from the closets and under the bed. And my parents, like my dad worked all the time, but my mom, she was home. She'd hear it a lot. So she'd hear him rattling around in there. She'd hear him chirping. And she thought that there was a bird or something of that nature in there. So she would go and she would tear the closets apart. There would, of course, be no one there. She put all the coats back, and then the chirping would start up again as soon as she shut the door. And that shaped a lot of my beliefs around the paranormal.
So,
So,
what do you think you call him a fairy? Is that what you basically called him, or uh, yeah? So
yeah,
fairies
yeah.
do differently, right? They look like butterflies. They look like little people. There's some pictures of them in Ireland. That's where it started
Mhm,
in
mhm.
Ireland. A lot of fairies, the fairy stories, and gremlins, and then that all come about. The gremlins. We don't want to talk about the gremlins, do we? Uh, you saw other things too through your life years. Uh, what other
Yeah.
thing? What's the next thing you saw that was that really stuck to your life, Tilly?
So when yeah, I was around 5 or 6. I thought that I saw the tooth fairy. I know that might sound absurd, but it's the only way that I can still to this day kind of think to describe, to put it in perspective maybe for anyone listening. Do I think it was the tooth fairy now? I don't think so, but it was still interesting, I think. So I had lost a tooth one night, and I was up late just laying in my bed because it hurt. You lose a
Mhm.
tooth. It's not exactly the most pleasant. And I was laying there and I saw a little light just come in from the outside window and float across my room. And it did a few laps and then I can't remember if it dissipated or if it left. But I thought that that meant that it was a tooth fairy because I had put, the tooth under my pillow.
Well, if you're
And
like
in the
me,
morning,
Tilly, if you're like me, Tilly, I was raised in a large family, and we were a blue collar
hmm,
family. We didn't have any money. I put
sure.
a tooth under my pillow, and it stayed there for a couple of months. Never, nothing ever replaced it. So there wasn't any $5 bill or anything like that. So are you
No.
supposed to get a gift? I think, Tilly, when you put your
Yeah.
tooth under a pillow. Now the light. Let's go. I'm sorry about breaking in, but you were talking about this light. Let's get back to your tooth, Tilly.
Um, yeah, it was a harmless light. I just laid in bed and I watched it and I said hello, and that was really about it. But of course I told my mom about it the next day. She's like, "No, you didn't." And then that's how I found out that the tooth fairy isn't real.
Oh, so the tooth fairy wasn't real, but that's
Yeah,
something
that's
that
that's
you
what my
experienced.
mom says
What-
anyway, or
Yeah.
my mom said.
What's the
Hmm.
next thing that you experienced after that tooth fairy? I know things are moving along, and you've had a lot of experiences. Artemis was telling me about your life and what's going on with you guys now
Yeah,
and what went on
yeah.
before you were married. What is the next thing after the fairy? What is the most weirdest event? I know Artemis mentioned this. The weirdest event that happened in your life, Tilly.
Sure. So this happened a few years ago now. This was in 2023. I want to say it was in June or July of 2023. Um, I love cats, and we had a different cat at the time, and we couldn't find her that day. Well, we went outside and sat down and we were talking about not being able to find her. Maybe she'll turn up. She's hiding somewhere that we didn't search, even though I had searched basically the whole house and he had helped me. And then Out of the corner of my eye, I see movement in the pavement over by where my cat loved to sun herself. And
To set the scene up a little bit more for you, we were sitting on our back porch. It was a screened-in porch area, which was sitting over top of a concrete pad. So, you can imagine that.
Yeah.
she
Okay.
She sees movement.
and then I look over and I see my cat pulling herself up out of the years dried pavement like it's jello. She is coming out of the cement,
Hmm.
pulling herself up by her front legs like it's no big deal. And then she came up out of the cement, and the cement just stayed solid around her, and wherever she was not, the cement just remained perfectly smooth and even. And then she just walked over to me like she didn't just come from some other dimension or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She probably was
that's
in
the
another
weirdest thing.
dimension and she come back to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you had these experiences that were drawn to you throughout your life and still going on. Uh, are there any other? Have you seen like a Bigfoot or cryptid, Tilly? And I know Artemis alluded to some of that that you might have seen cryptid or whatever. But did you have you seen these critters?
I have seen one dog man before.
Okay.
Uh, as you mentioned, I was part of the exorcist team for the Catholic Church for a while, and by some definitions, I qualify as an exorcist. So we went to work a case way out in the middle of the country, and the family was really afraid because of everything going on. And part of my old routine would to be to walk the perimeter and scan it, see if I can make contact with anyone, see if I see anything suspicious, see if I see any signs of fraud or sabotage, criminality, anything of that nature, whether it's paranormal or not. And I very briefly made contact with a dog man, and he had peeked out from behind a tree. He was just like curious because I was putting out the intention telepathically. I'm here to help everyone. I'm here to be fair to everyone, no matter who you are. I just want to hear your side and get to the bottom of this as best as possible. So I'm walking and I hear a twig snap or like a little rustling, and I stop. And he's a massive, he was well over 6 foot tall, massive, furry face like a wolf, but with, it's very interesting actually thinking about it now. The long pointed ears, I
Hmm.
saw that on my little friend Bo,
Hmm.
and then I also saw this on the dog man. So I'm wondering if the long pointed ears are genetic or if it's a dimensional marker. But anyways, he poked his head out from behind the tree and he just looked at me. He made eye contact for a few seconds and he was like, just briefly, if they are good neighbors to us, we will be good neighbors to them. And we just had a moment of mutual respect. He leaned back behind the tree. It sounded like he was going to walk out the other side. He never reappeared. He was just gone.
Okay. Just
And that was it.
yeah, and that's what a lot of people saying about Bigfoot that they just
Yeah.
disappear. They take one
Hmm.
one big jump and they're gone. And
Yeah.
I really think they're dimensional entities, just like that dogman critter. And they come through the dimensions, and I don't know if they're here to scare us or here to feed on other animals or whatever. But it's something we haven't, like we said earlier. Nobody is really positive. Nobody's really an expert
Sure.
in any of this stuff. So we don't really know for sure. And
Mhm.
it gets down to any of these paranormal sciences, pseudoscience, whatever they call them, but they're for real for the people who experience them. And okay, now you move on. Now, why did that cryptid critter? He was attracted to the exorcism, I guess. The energy that you guys put together, Tilly.
I think so. I think that they were watching the whole time. And they were they were watching from the forest line, from the wood line. We didn't see them around the house for the entirety of the case, but I did have that encounter at the wood line. So I'm sure that they were there, and I'm sure that they were, watching from a distance, and I think that's okay.
I know you can't tell us who or what address or whatever, but you can tell us, was it a man or a woman that was being that had this exorcism done on them?
Oh, it was a family. We were investigating a family, which was usually how it went. Yeah.
The whole family. Wow. Okay.
Hmm.
Now as we move on, I know you had some ET and UFO experiences. Artemis can probably join in now because you guys have been married how long now?
It's 4.5 years,
One
so
and a half. Okay.
55, yeah.
Okay. I'll
Yeah.
But
just
we've been together nearly 10.
Yeah.
yeah.
Actually, yeah.
I wanted to put together a timeline, and with you by yourself. And are there anything else that really happened to you, like an experience, like you said, before you met Artemis, and before you two got together, and then we'll join you both together as we move along in the timeline. Was there anything else that really weird that happened to you, Tilly, after the Dogman?
Oh,
Or, be-
countless,
or
countless.
yeah, or before the dog man. What's some of the weirdest things you ran into before the dog man, or back before you met Artemis, maybe?
Well, my threshold for weird might be a little bit different than perhaps most other people's. So for me, I grew up seeing little people in my grandma's backyard, in her back garden. I grew up seeing strange lights, moving stars, you could say,
Hmm.
people peeking out from behind or under furniture, um, enchanted trees. It's just my normal.
Yeah, and you have electrical problems, just like I do.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've had car problems.
yeah.
I just had a situation the other day. Same thing. I was telling Artemis about this, that you guys have electrical problems too. I guess with this energy
Yeah.
with paranormal or extraterrestrial. But I had the same thing happen to me in my car. It was Sunday, I believe it was, and it happened two other times. Two different. I got two cars, and well, my wife's got a car, but I drive both of them. And both of them have been this one here again. I turned it off after I washed it, and then I turned it back on to get the seat backwards where it goes automatically. And then I saw the check engine light, put it in drive, and I couldn't move.
Yeah.
I couldn't
No.
move. And I looked over at this one gas station. There was somebody sitting there in an older model car, and I couldn't see them too well. And they were looking directly at me. And I thought, well, this could be one of those hybrid, ETs doing this to me, the electrical charge. And then finally I turned off the key in a little frustration. Then I waited for a minute or so and I turned it back on. The car operated okay. Engine light was off. The dealership even checked one of my cars and they couldn't find nothing. So it's a weird incident that happened. And I want to ask you also, Tilly, I might have asked Artemis and we'll have him join in too. Have you met strange like people like maybe ET hybrids that they don't have too many words. They just sit there and they're kind of strange. I've been having this young girl that I've seen. She's probably about 15 or 16, and she could be my hybrid child from an incident that I had back in 2010 and even before then. Uh, but I've seen her now about four times, and at different places, different locations, but still looks the same. The dark hair looks like a maybe an Asian, Japanese. Now, have you two run into strange people like that you know that's not from this world, Tilly?
Well, I've heard that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is a particularly valid one, but that is only from my own experiences and what I've been told by some peoples that I've met. So all of the peoples that I've encountered genuinely seem to be indigenous to Earth, but just from different layers of reality. So you could say
Okay.
different vibrations or different overlaying dimensions of reality. I'm not the person really, I don't think, to ask about ET matters. And of course, I could always be wrong. I have no idea. This is just my experience.
Now, I wanted to ask you, and you, Artemis, both can join in on this, but are there's are there people? I know I've seen dimensional entities too. And my friends last Thursday, when he walked out, and this young gal was sitting by herself at a booth, and we had lunch together as friends. Brother was with me, but they never said anything about this young lady sitting there. It looked like she was just eating a salad, and she had all kinds of really shiny jewelry all over her wrist. And I looked at her, and she looked up at me in a strange way, and then she turned her head back down like she knew me, and I kind of felt strange, like the energy was there. But my two friends and my brother, none of them said anything about seeing her. Is it possible that certain people, can see certain dimensional entities and other people can't, even if they're right in the same room with us? Is that
Oh
possible?
yeah,
Both of
yeah, I
them.
think so. I mean, from a science, quote unquote science, whatever we know of that perspective, if you think about, like radio frequencies, they're always there, all present all the time, and you simply need to tune into each individual frequency in order to hear the signal. And I think our brains are pretty much the same way, that there are an infinite number of frequencies, channels, if you will, and it's a matter of being attuned to that particular frequency for you to be able to sense, or experience whatever is on that frequency. And I think maybe by accident, by genetics, by practice, there are a lot of different ways to change, your perception level. But absolutely, that I think it's just, some people are on that frequency and some are not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and I
hearken.
do
Yeah.
think
No, go
I
ahead,
do
Tony.
think too that glamour is a genuine phenomenon and a genuine ability. I seem to have had a lot of experiences with non-human people over the years who talk about glamour, and that matches up with the human tales of the fairies from many years back.
You might have to explain glamour for anybody who doesn't know,
Yeah.
because for me, the uninitiated, when I think glamour, I think of a drag queen, and that's
Yeah.
not even close
Right.
to
Yeah.
what we're talking about. So
No.
when she started using some of this language and these words, I had a lot of my own preconceived notions about what these things were, and more often than not, they weren't even close to what it was she was trying to communicate. So initially, it took some time to piece apart and essentially go back over and redefine my dictionary, get over my bias, my experience, whatever, again, preconceived notions, before
Right.
I could even begin to understand her experience, which took the better part of several years to do, which is why, here 10 years on, I think I'm finally starting to get close enough to really understanding what her actual experience of things is. And of course, the language usage. But go ahead and, for the uninitiated, like I once was, please explain what glamour
I
is.
was
Well,
going,
I think we
silly.
do better.
I was going to harken back to childhood days where
Ah,
like a
yes.
5-year-old or 4-year-old can look in a corner and say, "There's granddad, there's
Mhm.
grandpappy, and the mother say, Where's he at? He's standing right there." And so
Yeah.
you can't see him? No. So
Mhm.
I go back to these kids who can see things, but we can't. And you said you saw a fairy at a young
Mhm.
age. So is that really possible? Like I'm still saying that, and with Artemis was saying that we are in these frequency zones, and one can see something and the other one can't. Uh, Now, or you was going to elaborate on something, Tilly, before I jumped in. I'm sorry, but
Oh, that's all right. You're excited, and I think that's
Well,
really awesome.
yeah, you were going to elaborate on glamour.
I thought
yeah,
that you might be able to translate better.
But that also a quick note about children, supposedly or seemingly being able to see more than what an adult typically would. My own personal understanding and theory on that is that the human brain, for essentially for survival on this plane, on this planet, in this reality, will develop something called the default mode network, which essentially acts like, blinders
Mhm.
and narrows you to, certain autopiloted behaviors through your experience that the brain thinks these are, positive things that will keep you surviving, keep you out of trouble. So we're going to keep doing these things. And
Right.
there's, infinite number of experiences that you can have, but through time, you will start to develop schemas or stories or beliefs and structures that then, in my opinion, with that default mode network, it will slowly but surely blind you to these things that children seem to so easily perceive. Because by that point, as Tilly was telling you earlier about, I'm talking to the flowers, that's just what I do, and nobody's told me that's a silly thing yet. So, why not? Children will do those sorts of things all the time. And again, over time, they get trained out of that. And I think that's why it's so much easier for a child to perceive these things because they are far less encumbered, far less limited by that default mode network that adults tend to be. And that's why I said perhaps through practice, we can actually open up some of these frequency channels again to be able to perceive some of these things. Other people may have an easier time with that than others through meditation or anything else. Again, maybe because of a genetic predisposition, but it's possible.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
Yeah, I
um
think we always look back and we say, "Well, I wish I was a kid again." But I think I'd like to be a kid again because of their imagination, like you just said a while ago, and also their energy. Wouldn't it be fabulous
mhm,
that we're as older people that we could have the energy and the imagination a kid does? We could probably do a lot of things,
yeah,
and being
right.
an adult. And Tilly, you were gonna, I guess, proceed after Artemis on what he was talking about the glamour and everything.
Yeah.
And go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you also have seen. Have you talked to dead relatives? I'll throw that in on the suitcase too.
Right, yeah. And so I guess, yeah, to real quick go over glamour since she's asking me to sort of translate that for people to
Okay.
understand. So imagine cloaking, if you
Yeah.
will.
Right.
So it's when you're thinking about the world as a vibrational thing and that everything is a frequency or vibration, you need to only understand how to manipulate energy
Right.
at the atomic level to create anything that you want. So beings who can use glamour are able to essentially project whatever it is that they want people on, outside of them to see. And so for beings that are here wanting to interact with humans, they will project certain views, I guess illusions, whatever it is,
Right.
presentation that they want to the human,
Like a mask.
like a
Right.
mask, right? And that would be considered glamour.
Which is different than shapeshifting, by the way, because
Yeah.
shapeshifting, you are actually changing the bodily form at the molecular level. Glamour is simply, however, the illusion.
Yeah, the mask, the costume,
Yeah, the makeup.
the hologram, whatever
Yeah.
you want. So
I
yeah,
think I think a lot of ETs appear in shape shifting form, and
Mhm.
some of the humanoid ETs that I've seen were probably they were probably shape shifted, but some of them have actually, well, a couple of them have been around other people that have seen them, and I know that they take some kind of form because there's more people than myself have seen two or three of them. Well, actually, I've
Yeah.
seen four that were very odd, and other people would come up to me and say that person's really kind of odd. They don't talk. They don't only they ask you silly questions, and I have that at the gym sometimes. I don't know if these guys lifting weights, they come up with some stupid stuff or not, but I have one there just said, he said, "Do you read books?" After I told him, he asked me what I did, and I said, "I don't do anything." No, not really. I write books and do this podcast stuff, uh, but yeah, it's this shape shifting and changing, one's appearance and going into different things, and I think the dogman and the cryptids also do that because they have pictures or videos of one that shapeshifted from a coyote or wolf out west, and they went into being a human and they got up and took off running. I don't know if a
Mhm.
lot of these videos are true, but have you seen anything like that, Tillie? Have you with
I
your
have.
okay, with your frequencies you can pick up? Tell us a little bit about what you've seen.
Sure. Oh goodness, where to begin? I've seen a lot of transformations from non-human people. Um, I think a good place for me to start would be with a lot of the exorcism cases that I've worked where there seemed to be genuine non-human activity in the houses.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time, these non-human people would be attempting to present to other people around me as something unsettling or terrifying. And then when I would enter and they would look at me and we'd have an interaction, I could see them transforming into something a lot friendlier or something a lot more neutral. And
Right.
then that person and I would start having a conversation on our own level. Because so for me, I am diagnosed as being autistic, but I also have the extra diagnosis on top of that as having very little ego content and very little emotional content. So I seem to be able to, you could say, vibe really well with these interdimensional non-human people. My struggle comes with people who have um, more ego content and more emotional content than I do. I don't tend to get along very well, unfortunately, with people who have a lot more emotion and ego than I do, because I'm a very um, objective, you could say, cold, quote unquote, person. And that lines up with these other types of people, but it does not mesh well with the common human experience.
Mm-hmm.
So they would approach me very differently than how they were approaching the rest of the team around me. And that was reflected in how they were presenting in the shadows or where they were lurking, what they were doing, those types of things. So, for example, the mother of a family swore that she saw some type of terrifying, like half dog, half eagle beast in the corner in the shadows one time. And then when I looked over, I entered the room and I looked over, the non-human person was absolutely there, and I saw what she saw, but then this non-human person just morphed into a plain shadow person a little bit taller than me, and we just proceeded to have a conversation. Um, and they just asked if I could ask the rest of the family to leave. I did. We talked, and I learned a lot. And I brought some of that information back to the human family, and that was it.
Okay.
And but it's happened in just about every case that I've seen. It's happened in almost every personal non-human encounter that I've ever had. So shape-shifting and glamour is just like how human beings put on makeup or like a beard prosthetic, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I now you and this woman saw this non-human entity. Did anybody else in the room see that non-human entity except for you two?
It was just us when I originally saw it,
Okay.
and then because the woman started screaming, the rest of the family came running, and I don't, it was so chaotic. I don't remember if
Mm,
anyone else saw that.
okay. What are some of
Yeah.
the other scary things? I know, you know what you're saying that you got rid of your ego. That's a hard thing for people to do. And if all of us can do that to get rid of our
Oh,
ego.
I was gonna
I
say,
didn't get rid of my ego.
yeah,
I was
Oh,
born with low ego
yeah, that's
content.
actually a really good, in my opinion, something important to discuss is that whole difference there between somebody who is born with lowered ego content versus somebody who is perhaps like the average human
I see.
who is pretty well primed for developing a character with lots of opinions that are very emotionally based,
Mhm.
and very self-centered and subjective opinion. All opinions, I guess, are subjective, but and not very objective, or what you might even call a critical thinker for that matter. We're all, a lot of us humans are pretty emotionally based. And when I say ego, I don't mean that in a negative or derogatory way, because egos here are important for developing an experience and a story, going through life, having,
Survival.
survival is another thing. You do have to be self-centered here because this planet is about living in a very
Yeah, you
certain
got to
way. So
protect yourself too. Yeah.
yeah, it is important, but it's very different than somebody who, like in her case, like when she says cold, as a cold person, a lot of people who are higher in ego will say, "Oh, that must mean that she's very mean, or she's, like maybe psychopath or something like that." When really what she means is that she is not subject to the really, snap like emotional triggered responses that a lot of people are. And so that person you might consider hot, whether they're,
Mhm.
quick to cry or quick to throw a punch, it doesn't matter. That person is much higher in ego content
Right.
versus someone like her who's colder, where, something could be thrown their direction. Obviously, like a dog man that's coming out of the woods, that looks ferocious, for a lot of people are immediately going to have some kind of a response to it. Whereas she's just, oh, okay, I'm gonna wait for that thing to change form. Like this is nothing new,
Uh,
That is like a core difference between someone like me and someone like her.
yeah.
So
Yes,
She's
and
not
this
ready.
is why I'm
You're not ready to defend yourself or fight. Is that what the
right.
Artemis is saying, Tilly?
correct. That's part of it, yeah. And I'm glad that I have him here. He's my social translator now.
He's very eloquent in what he says. He
Yeah,
discusses things in a detailed scientific manner, in which I told him last time. I find that an attribute that for him
yeah,
to be able to do that, and a
I
very,
agree.
very educated type of approach to details. But Tilly, you said you don't have fear. Now, are you a psychic or an empath along with all these other? Can you walk up to a person and know them really quick, Tilly? And could you give us
Yeah,
illustrations of that?
but
That's how we met.
I
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that was the thing. That's how our entire relationship developed. Was, after we had messages back and forth, online dating, and had pretty good rapport that way. When I met her in person for the first time, I mean, it was interesting because she acts like a mirror to, people who interact with her. Generally, it
Mhm.
will reflect what is kind of what they have going on at their deepest, traumas, or ego woundings, whatever that is. But I, initially, I did not like her at all, because she was so happy, and it sounds terrible for me to say, but that's because I had so much garbage going on myself. But later on, when we met in person that evening, for the first time, she essentially reached into my deepest, what I would call soul core, and then described to me who I felt that I was at that level, which, beyond the ego, beyond the avatar, the character, the, again, the trauma and everything else, the stories that, we've developed here on this planet, as who we, are, quote unquote. She reached past all of that and began to tell me things that had I knew, but I didn't really know that I knew. I'd never told anybody, I'd never written it down, but it just felt like such an intimate knowing, in a way that I had never been seen as a person before. And she just pulled all of that out, and she can do that when she chooses.
Yeah, us married
I don't do
people.
it.
Yeah,
I
us
don't do it very often though because it frightens most people. So
yeah. You can actually. I was going to say most of us married people, we can look at each other and they'll say, "I know what you're going to say. You better not say it." So,
Yeah.
do you ever have those moments?
oh
Absolutely.
yeah,
Really?
And, more to that point, I would say that, that happens after, lots of exposure and time you've lived with somebody. And I believe at this point, I believe that a lot of what people know about each other, whether in, long-term friendship or even in a long-term relationship, is really just, yeah, all of that, defense mechanisms and the trauma that we have experienced, and then, as we've developed as a result of that. And that unless we do our own deep inner work, and know ourselves, it's impossible for anybody else to really know us on that level. And so after experiencing what I did with her, I believe that the vast majority of people don't have what I call true intimacy. It's just they know each other's habits and things that they've developed as a result of life lived here, but it's not really who they are, which
Yeah.
is other than that, it's hard for me to describe. So
Yeah,
yeah,
we
it's
can read each other's minds. My wife and I do the
yeah,
same thing. I'll think of something, and about 2, 3 minutes later, she'll say, "Oh, did you want me to get that?" And I
yeah,
said,
yeah,
"Yeah." I
yeah.
said, "How'd
Right.
you know?"
Yeah.
So Tilly, have you met anybody that you didn't like or that you were afraid of from their energy, negative energy? You pick up negative and positive
People are
energy, right?
people are non-human people, because those are two
It's a
different
big
things.
difference. Yeah. Yeah, to be honest, I don't do much in the public eye anymore unless someone is vetted by him at this point, because I keep finding that people with higher ego content and higher emotional content, they really don't like me.
Yeah.
I get threats a lot of the time, really indecent propositions, objectifying, stalkers, just a whole lot of nastiness. I've had people attack me on the street.
Oh
It-
wow.
Like it's bad. So I have only had one truly harmful, I would say, negative experience with non-human entities, which I think they were NPCs. Um, but I've had thousands of bad experiences with human beings and, just anyone with higher ego content and a higher emotional
Mhm.
content. So
Right.
I stay away from most of the population here. If I'm going to talk to someone, for the most part, I'm talking to non-human people or to Artemaeus or to a few human friends that I have, and that's it, because people really here are not very kind to me.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people not very kind right now. There's a lot of angry people around the world. We're living in a very stressful time period. Uh, yeah, Tilly, now when when you meet these negative people, do you see an aura, or how do you see them when you first see them? How do you figure them out so quick, Tilly?
I don't do anything to figure them out. They do all the work for me. They
Oh,
attack me. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll usually start out with the right out the get-go. When I say that, she's like a mirror to people, she'll know very, very quickly just from their behavior without having to expend any kind of energy to look
Yeah.
into their, an aura or, anything else about them. They make it pretty clear pretty quick. And
mhm,
that's just, I think, the theory that I've developed at that point is, again, based on vibration and frequency. If you think about harmonious frequencies or harmonious vibrations, they sound good together to our ear. She has a particular frequency or a vibration that she puts out that if somebody is not on that same frequency or a harmonious one at minimum, it there's a lot of discord, a lot of disharmony, and that causes them in their high emotional or high ego content to respond in an agitated fashion. So
mhm.
kind of like if you think about, the government's, weapons, the what are the sonar, the types of frequency weapons that they use, basically to bring people to their knees because
Yeah,
it's a
microwave.
sound.
Yeah,
Just yeah,
microwave energy, and yeah.
yeah, or yeah, infrared. I mean, any kind. It's you can think about it kind of in that way that her whatever frequency she's putting out causes agitation to people who are on a frequency that is not anywhere near that or is a disharmonious one. So she'll know pretty quick. And if it isn't for that, I'm usually with her and I'll tell her, "This is
Yeah.
not a good situation. You don't want this."
Right. Yeah. Tilly, tell us about ghosts. Let's move on to ghosts now. Have you seen ghosts
Yeah.
or past relatives? And if have you seen them together since you've been together, Tilly?
That's a great question, I think. Well, I personally, I think I may have seen two ghosts in two different cases that I worked. for the Catholic Church. And then there's a third one that I'm pretty sure was a mimic, but of course, I could always be wrong. It might have been a spirit. Um, yeah, they just presented as the people who recently had passed away in those cases, and they were agitated and confused, and we helped them to cross over. And I personally have never seen any of my own ancestors, never heard from them, anything like that. No.
Mm.
I have worked some mediumship cases generally, but those cases I didn't see anything physically. It all took place up here, you could say. So from my mind and then up higher on higher dimensions where I seemed to be able to take a peek in and meet with that person for a few minutes.
Right.
And
You said you
that's it.
communicated with these non-human entities and also now the ghost and dimensional entities. What have they told you? Is there something really sticks to your mind about what they said to you and how what they told you what was going on? Do you know have anything that they've passed down to you, Tillie? And also
There's a
Artemisia.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. I was told that I'd be coming into my own between 2020 and 2030, which is apparently, allegedly, a massive time of transition for humankind.
Yeah.
And that this is, you could say, the rapture era. And so I'm here just to help anyone who would like some help. Aside from that, all of the non-human people that I've ever met, whether they be so-called evil or so-called good or somewhere in between, they give the same core message that for people to get where they want to go, if they've got um, moderate to high ego content and moderate to high emotional content, they have to focus on doing the shadow work and taking core responsibility for their lives, because that's how people will vibrate out of reach of the so-called demons and vibrate into the timelines that people would associate with being quote unquote good.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting because at the end of the day, then, in my opinion and in my understanding, there's no such thing as good or evil. It's all an illusion, and it's all ultimately working for the benefit of everyone eventually. It just depends on, you could say, human subjectivity, how someone wants to look at it, the lessons that they choose to pick up from certain events. So for example, I've had some cases where for a few years after, many years sometimes, these people who took my advice in the exorcist cases, they healed. The activity eventually stopped. Their lives turned around in ways that they never could have seen coming, and they became happy, healthy, functional families for the most part. And then we have the other cases where people refused to stop the drinking, stop the bodily abuse, stop the familial abuse, stop running from their problems, and their lives just continued to implode. And then the demonic activity just kept getting worse and worse and worse because there was more for that non-human person to continue feeding on. And that's where I'm at now. I see myself as a quantum story collector. I'm just here to assist where possible and look at all the neat stories by my measure and maybe sometimes write about them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's you're writing about some of them now, but I have you ever run into anybody, either one of you, that didn't have a soul? I heard there's people on this planet that don't have a soul. I'm not talking about hybrids, ET hybrids. They probably don't have a soul either, but the ones that don't have a soul, those are the ones who commit a lot of the crime, really bad crime, I guess you could say. I don't want to get into the pew pew stuff, but there's a lot of that going on, and people don't have a conscience. is that a person that doesn't have a soul? Either one of you can answer that, Artemis or
I don't think that's the case. I think we have the theory that I have is that there are, and this is within every type of being. There are those that are what we would call NPCs, non-playing characters, who are essentially just a program. There's no sentience in them at all. So you have them, which you might call soulless, I guess, if you want. And then you have the rest who, even those people who commit, or those beings who commit what we would call atrocious things,
right,
that they still have souls. They still have, that's an experience that they knowingly agreed to before they inhabited and incarnated in that body, that life, and it's purposeful. So there is a soul there, and it's not, we would like to label it as humans, good or evil, because we do need that kind of morality, I guess, to make certain decisions and have, stories and, create all this that we do, the experiences that we do.
right,
But they even the most heinous, psychopath or serial killer or non-human entity that turns dogs inside out on Skinwalker Ranch, they all have souls, and they're certain things that they are, roles that they are playing, doing what they're doing.
right.
That's my
Now, yeah, I know that both of you are talking about dimensional entities, and Tillie, you were talking about dimensional entities. Do you believe the scientists have been talking a lot about the Matrix, and also ever since that movie come out here a few years back, uh, that said that things are holographic. Are we living in a holographic world, a matrix, Tillie? To you, what you communicate with, you've seen before? Can you relate to that?
I can, in a sense. Yeah. I think that it is a fair enough um, trope, I suppose, or reality map, I suppose. I don't think that it is entirely accurate, but I do believe that for the sake of translation, I think that it'll do.
Yeah, I I know the Avatar brought a lot of thought process to people when they saw the movie. It did me. That that you could have two individuals. You're talking about
Yeah.
quantum entanglement, I guess, in a way, and they're behaving like themselves, but
Mhm.
they're in another avatar type situation. I I keep thinking about that and try to make heads and tails of it. And good and evil, I think that is made up of a reincarnation. I think if you don't get it right the first time, then you're reincarnated. Either one of you is meant, talk about that if you wish, Tillie or Artemis. How about the thing reincarnation?
Sure.
If you
Well,
don't get
for
it right,
me,
you come back. Okay. Yeah. Well, there's a
I,
time.
I don't
Yeah.
it's not black and white for me.
Yeah.
In my understanding, there are different rules for different genetics. And so this is why we might have the stories of the angels coming here and they didn't do anything quote unquote wrong, but they came here to help mankind, you could say. But
Mm,
then we have the human beings who, when they pass away, if they've not learned what they needed to learn, then of course, they might come back. But even that is too simple, in my opinion, because I see things like this. We have the earth layer here, and then above that, we have what we call typically the veil, and that separates earth and then the rest of the quantum realm. But then I think that there is a second veil above that separates all of incarnation from source or God, you could say. And therefore, anything quote unquote below that second veil is part of incarnation.
okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, I kind of, so as you were talking about it, I was thinking dimensional levels, whatever.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
then I always tell people I got this word that I use, it's spiritual currency, depending on what your spiritual currency here on earth, how high you go in your dimensions, and how, like, there might be 14 dimensions. and then some people return to the source, the divine, the creator, and then others go to different dimensions in which they are operating from a lower frequency. I guess you talk about a lower frequency and a higher frequency. Not, that's why I call it spiritual currency. But otherwise, now the two of you, has there been something really weird that happened with the two of you witnessing it? Either one of you can go off on this and tell us
Okay.
about something that really weird happened to both of you together.
Well, I mean, one particular thing that immediately pops to mind is that she was telling me all about this particular day that her and I shared together going out to what was one of her favorite places. And she recounted the entire day's events. You know, we went here and you saw this and you liked that, and we ate this and it was good. And, she's going through this whole day. And, I'm thinking I must be missing something because she wanted to go back to this place, and I'm searching in my mind like I do not remember this at all, and there's really no reason for me to have forgotten an entire day's itinerary of going somewhere. I mean, I can imagine forgetting something that I said. That happens all the time, or even maybe some quick place that we stopped. I don't know. I mean, even that's a stretch, but she had an entire day's worth of memories with me that I didn't have at all. In fact, I had never been to this location at all. Like there was no mistaking that I just was never there in my
Mhm.
memory. And as we kind of would talk about some things, we noticed that we'd had a few other, instances of that where there were memories that one had, but the other one didn't have at all.
Yeah.
And it often happens where I'll say, "Oh, I love this thing," and then she'll say, "No, you don't. You hate that thing." So it's like one extreme to the other, where we notice there are massive differences in memory or core things about our characters here
Hmm.
that we have completely different memories about. So that was a little bit alarming at first because it's easy for partners to forget, that one says something, the other, those little things, but not quite to the extremes that we have. So that you might file under Mandela effects, I
Yeah.
suppose, or different quantum versions of
Right.
yourself.
Yeah. I think for me, the weirdest things have been where you and I we've had missing time together.
Mm.
And we've seen things in the sky that you say that you don't remember after the fact. And that's always struck me as really strange because it seems like I'm um emerging from these experiences with the complete memories and you're not.
Yeah, which
That's weird.
yes,
I think, anyways. I'm not used to that.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah.
I ran
Yeah.
into that as a witness to a UFO. My best friend and I saw a UFO together and stood there and watched it.
Mhm.
It was only about 60 feet off the ground. And
Yeah.
he saw and heard things, and I was focusing on certain things and he focused on certain things. Like he focused in on the buzzing, and I didn't pay any attention to buzzing sound. I was looking at the portals, the windows of the craft. And he didn't notice it leaving, and I did. So witnesses like that in the law and in courts, they have the same thing. You can have three different people witness an accident, and each one of them will come up with their own version, the accident. And so they got to be
Well,
real careful with that.
that is true.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about here, though, is he will have literally no memory of it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it just never happened
if
for
Where,
him
where do we
in
go?
certain
Where do
cases.
where do we go, Tilly, when we don't have any memory? We're going somewhere, and we come back and
like the Men in Black neuralizer, maybe
yeah, yeah,
we're having our
yeah,
memory wiped,
Yeah.
which
yeah.
wouldn't surprise
Okay.
me if that was the case.
If
Yeah.
you can believe this or not, we've been an hour and 15 minutes already. Could you tell
Oh
us,
wow.
Really?
yeah, Artemaeus and Tilly,
Uh,
tell us how we can find out more about you. I think you give me you said Weird Walk Home YouTube. You do that one, and of course you write for this one magazine, Zoner Press, and Swartz of Ancient Aliens. You've done some work there. And could you tell us anything else how we can catch up with you and find out? And do you take clients, Tilly? Do you talk to people?
On rare occasion, a big reason that I got out of doing a lot of psychic care work is that people weren't taking the advice seriously. So essentially, I was just turning into a very well paid um, companion with psychic abilities, and that's not my thing. So if someone's really serious about doing the deep inner work and changing, absolutely, I am happy to take that person on. But outside of that, no, and I'm not looking for any new clients.
Yeah.
There has to be a big payoff for
Yeah.
me morally and materially at this point. But
Right.
aside from that, you can find us on YouTube at The Weird Walk Home.
Okay.
And if you search Tillie Treadwell on Facebook, you'll find our profile, which Artemaeus runs at this point. And then I write for Zontar Press. You can see our website at weirdtimebook.com. And then if anyone wants to read any of my work otherwise, you are most welcome to join us over on Facebook at the Quad Coalition of Sciences and the International Dogman Project. And then I also write for Outer Limits magazine. Oh,
Okay.
yes, and we are going to be honored guests at the Full Disclosure Now conference in St. Pete come this July. So we'll be making the rounds and hopefully making some magic for anyone who might wish to spread the love and say hello. You can
Okay.
find more information about that on their website.
Okay. You said International Dogman Society
Project.
Project.
Yep.
Okay. All right. All righty. We're making notes of that now. So, but if you want me to remember anything that I didn't get where you're going to be, the Facebook or something, just send me a message on some of the things that you are involved with, so I can put that in the narrative and go from there. Now I appreciate Artemaeus, you bringing Tillie on board tonight and talking. It was nice hearing from both of you, and I really was interested. You could tell by some of the questions, and I was making notes as I was going. So, you know, we talk about a lot of fascinating things just now, and we just only skimmed the surface, to tell you the truth. And to get down into the nitty gritty, you'd need more time and more space to do that. So, Tillie and Artemaeus Treadwell, thank you so much for being on the show. You've been listening to Dave Emmons and the Strange Reality Show. Thank you very much, and good evening. And thank you guys, Artemaeus and Tillie, for being on the show. Bye bye.
Thank you